Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday to you. Another day in the life of real estate. So today in today's show, we're going to be talking. I'm going to really honing in a little bit on just what's going on in the market. So we're going to be talking about the economy, what that looks like, and the main reason why is yesterday it seems like it always takes a few days for the concept of interest rates and volatility in the market. It always takes a few days of that type of stuff happening for the conversation to shift a little bit into that direction. And it seemed like yesterday that was like the theme. It seemed like every conversation I was having with my real estate agents and other agents and people in general, and people are starting to ask more and more about the market. And a lot of times it has to do with the media and what they talk about and how they talk about interest rates and what the market is doing. And then, of course, everybody has their opinions and what that looks like and speculations and all that kind of stuff, right? It's just the way it works. And it's good. We got to have those kind of conversations anyway. We got to talk about these things. We got to throw it all out there and see where we are. And today's no different. This is the real estate market, and it is constantly shifting. So today, that's going to be kind of the main focus. We're going to be talking about that in general. I'm going to read a few articles for you One is by Yahoo Finance. It's titled, "Is the housing market going to crash again? Here's what experts think." So we'll break that one down. Always like to do when we start talking about opinions and things like that, especially like in regards to the economy. We'll do another article to see where that article also says we land. This one will be, I found one by Fox Business, and it says housing market gaining momentum as spring season begins. And we'll talk about what they're talking about in regards to that. And then I'm going to go into two articles that I was going to share in yesterday's live stream, but I got long-winded on a lot of the other articles, so we did not get to those. So today I'm going to bring those back just because I think we really should have these conversations. One is going to be a good one to piggyback off of the economy and interest rates and that kind of stuff. It will be a good conversation because it is titled "Home Ownership by Generation: How Housing Trends Differ Across Gen Z, Millennials, Gen X, and Boomers." So it's going to put us into perspective. So once we go on the journey about the economy and what's going on, we're going to end where we'll have a conversation in regards to like what the demographics are doing in this market. Like how does Gen Z buy and sell properties, and Millennials and Gen X and Boomers? Like, what does that look like? So we're going to have a big bird's eye view of the economy, and then we'll hone in a little bit onto the generations and what their struggles and pros and cons are. And then we'll wrap it up with, I'm just going to be talking about an article that the National Association of Realtors put on their website titled "NAR Introduces New Expertise-Driven Application Process for 2027 Committees." And the reason why it sounds like a boring article to go over, but I want to throw it out there to end the show today because there's a lot of, issues going on in regards to this private listing networks and the MLS and the Association of Realtors. You have to, I don't want to just constantly be talking about National Association of Realtors and MLS and not show you what is actually happening is really, really good there. Because it kind of come across a little bit like I'm kind of against what they're doing, and I'm actually not. I think they do a lot of good, and I think there's a relevance here that we need to pay attention to. So we're going to keep that in perspective. And what they're doing as far as committees and how they make that happen and stuff like that is a good move and what they're heading. So we're going to end the show with that article. But before I get started in the actual show, I'm just going to talk real quick briefly about interest rates, where I'm going to do this every single day for about 5 minutes, maybe less, just talking about interest rates in general and what the trend shows. Because again, it's just a number that is just out there everywhere. So let's just quickly go through that. Again, I mention this every time. Mortgage News Daily is where I get this from. It's not hyper local. It's a generalization. Different banks will have different, rates and stuff like that. So if you're a consumer out there, shop around, see what you got. But as far as just getting a good base idea, this is a great site for that because it does monitor that. It's quick to find. It's an app, all that kind of stuff. Not affiliate. I say this every time. I just want to make that very clear. It's just something I like. I'm recommending it because I use it a lot. So check it out. But basically, excuse me. Basically, the interest rate is, we had a spike up, the past couple weeks due to the Iranian war and what's going on there with oil prices and the treasury yields and bonds and all that kind of stuff drove that interest rate up. Now, when we say up, yes, we were close to 6 and we dipped below 6 a little bit. Right now, today, the 30-year fixed rate is sitting right at 6.43%. Now, that's down 0.02% from yesterday. So a little bit of a downtick, but again, this fluctuation doesn't really mean much. Even that 0.4 change, even though it does affect things, it's not a drastic change, and especially historically speaking. So we don't get in the weeds and say, well, interest rates are going high and we're going to have a crash, all this kind of stuff. We don't go that route. We monitor it and we adjust. But the reality is the interest rate is still a very good rate for the majority of people looking to buy. So it's a good rate, historically speaking. But if you look at the graph here, you kind of see what's happened. If we go back, this would have been February, right, of 2022. This is the crazy time. We're like 3%, whatever. And then we get into the 2022 market where we start seeing the spike up. Then we get into crazy, right at the almost 8% mark in 2023. So in October of 2023, we were almost at 8%. Then you start looking at a trend here where it's kind of going down, getting close to 6 and hovering right around 6.5. That's where we've been. That's been That's been our location there. So we're going to be hovering between 6 and 6.5 probably for the rest of this year, depending on what happens. Obviously, it's a market, so it can fluctuate in many drastic different directions. But all the economists are in agreement that we're probably going to hover right around that point. So just know that. Bobby, welcome in, my friend. Thanks for tuning back in, my friend. Appreciate that greatly. Yep. Thank you, guys. So appreciate it. All right. With all that being said, let's go ahead and get started on today's show. Quick swig of coffee. So grab your coffee and let's go. Welcome to Real Estate Brief. I'm Adam. Today, we're going to be cutting through the noise. We're going to get to the truth in the news. We're going to look at the data, and I'm going to give you some of my observations and where I truly do believe you can find some opportunity. So if you're ready to gain your real estate edge, let's dive into our very first story. And like I said, we're going to be talking today specifically, mostly, at the end, we'll deviate just a little bit, but mostly today is going to be focused on the economy, what's going on in the housing industry. And the articles that I'm going to be reading through are not articles from the typical real estate news sites, because the reason being is, Inman and Risk Media and those type of things obviously are in our industry. So they are very positive and they're great resources to that. But what I wanted to do today is I wanted to focus on articles that the consumer themselves are reading and the information that they're getting and what is being circulated out there. So what came up today was two articles. Two articles by Yahoo Finance, which is an aggregate. They just pull in information and use multiple news sources, both talking about the economy. And then also, I've got another article by the foxbusiness.com. So we're going to be talking about the economy in general from an outside the real estate industry perspective and major news outlets. So that's the topic. So let's see what is actually being said. And I'm actually very thankful that what is being said has actually been good. And it's been very accurate as far as like what we see even inside of our industry and as far as numbers are concerned. So let's get into this one. This is the very first one we're going to be talking about today. So this is Yahoo Finance, and it says, is the housing market going to crash again? So it's proposing the question. Here's what experts think. So it's not necessarily an opinion piece. They're going out and they're getting opinions from multiple economists, and this is a good move. This is written by Michael Lerner and E. Napolitano, which is the contributor, and Hal Bundrick, which is a senior writer. Now, let's begin. It says a housing market crash, and this is really good because it's going to begin before it gets into the topic. It's going to set the stage with what makes a housing market or a housing market crash, like what causes that. So here's how it begins. It says a housing market crash happens when home values plummet due to a lack of demand for an oversupply of homes. So let's pause and ask ourselves the very first question is, are we seeing that in our real estate markets? Are you guys seeing that in your local housing market? Are you seeing home values plummet? I look at that all the time. We're not seeing that. Do we have an oversupply of homes? Some markets might have a lot of homes, but do we have an oversupply? Again, not seeing that. So historically, most crashes happen when those two things converge, okay? The factors leading to a housing market crash are varied, ranging from economic recessions to high mortgage rates that make it less affordable to buy a home. So there's outside, pressures that cause those two things to fluctuate, and then we lead into a crash. Now, given we're sitting in a place where you could classify it as we're at war with Iran, all that kind of stuff. We've got oil prices going high. We have all these type of things going on, and there can be fear entering into our market. So that's a factor. And I'll break this down just a little bit once we get through these articles, kind of some of the conversations I've had even just yesterday with some of my own agents. All right. A housing crash can have upsides, low home prices, and downsides, losing built up equity and tighter finances. So what's ahead for the housing market in 2026? Appreciate the likes, guys. Thank you guys for joining in. Greatly appreciate that. Thank you. All right. Is the housing market going to crash soon? Generally, Experts do not foresee a housing market crash in 2026. If anything, they see a greater sense of normalcy following multiple years of twists and turns. Before I elaborate, let's read the quote here. It says, quote, "We're not heading toward a housing crash. We're in a market correction defined by stability, not volatility." Hobby Hanna, CEO of Howard Hanna Real Estate Services, said via email. Quote again, "Today's housing environment is fundamentally different from 2008. Homeowners have record levels of equity, lending standards are sound, and inventory remains constrained. What we're seeing now is a normalization, not a collapse, as the market adjusts to new economic realities. For buyers and sellers, this is a market filled with opportunity and resilience, not instability or uncertainty." Now, there's a lot to kind of unpack in his statements right there. And Howard Hanna is a very large, privately owned, family-owned, franchise-ish, but real estate brokerage. And they have a big influence in the Northeast and the Northwest and things like that. Good company and do a lot of good things. And Hobby Hanna makes some good predictions and really is engaged in the industry. So I'll applaud him here. And a lot what he has to say is very much true across the country. Now, there's little pockets here and there where it might deviate just a little bit. But the reality is what he is saying is absolutely true, right? Today's housing environment fundamentally is different from 2008. If we were to compare 2008 to now, right, we had predatory lending, we had all kinds of loose lending standards, we had this oversupply of homes being built everywhere because interest rates were so low and people were just giving away homes. It was just a complete mess. So again, we're always comparing back to 2008 and we're comparing that crash to where we are now. What I would more like to do is probably talk more about like a recession that we kind of hit in 2022. I think that's a little bit closer because in 2022, we saw interest rates spike up and then everything kind of slowed way down. And that, again, not a crash, but more of like a recession into a readjustment. We're now on the other side of that where we see what he's even talking about, a stabilization, a more stable, adjusted type of market. And I've used the term this, and this term can kind of sound a little bit negative, but it's not meant to be. It's more of a stabilization, but it's called stagnant because we're not seeing one thing go crazy on one direction or the other. It's leveled off pretty well across the industry. You're going to have some dips here, you're going to have some raises here, but this is a normalization of a market. And yes, you have the external pressures causing certain things to adjust. Interest rates might go down, might go up a little bit. But again, it's marginal. It's just these marginal adjustments, right? And this might be a good time for me to kind of pause for a second and elaborate a little bit more into a conversation I had with an agent yesterday. And the question was asked is like, well, they were saying how their business has slowed way down. Like they don't have as much business as they felt like they do, and they maybe see other agents doing more business and that kind of stuff. They were kind of wrestling with that thought, right? Like, what is going on here? And worried to some degree, not necessarily fear-based at all, but worrying to some degree is like, is this market crashing? Like, are we heading in an interesting direction, or what does this look like? And here's what my answer was, and this is what I want you to think through, is when you start reading through economical articles like this, and what we're reading here, what Hobby Hanna is even saying, is all the makeup inside of our industry shows that we're not heading towards a crash. What it does show, though, is that if things have slowed down in a spring market where things should be bursting at the seams and being busy because of the interest rate and that kind of stuff, what we are seeing is an emotional response to what is happening externally, right? And that doesn't mean a crash is happening. It just means more pent-up demand is taking place. So even though you might feel like it should be bursting at the seams right now, the media and what is being talked about and what is going on in Iran and the gas prices and the cost of goods is causing people to be more conservative with their expenses. So if that's the case, it doesn't mean the job market is hurting. It does not mean that the housing industry is collapsing. It doesn't mean we're heading towards a crash. It just means that people are holding back a little longer to wait and see what happens. And what that traditionally does is create more pent-up demand. The demand does not go away. it just delays itself. So when you start looking at the stabilization of the market where we currently sit, nothing drastic, you can just make the assumption that we have probably a little bit more pent-up demand, that if things can go well in Iran or anywhere else, then you could see a little bit of an opening up of the market for that pent-up demand to be able to come out and start buying properties. So that was my response. It doesn't mean it's 100% accurate, but it is kind of where we currently sit. Now, depending on how long everything goes and the gas prices and the cost of goods could have a major effect long term. But right now, that's not where we're at. So that's where we're currently sitting. So let's go back into the article here. What about jobs data? Okay, jobs data, because jobs is one of the main driving forces that determines affordability of homes. It says it could be difficult to consider early 2026 as a market filled with opportunity when the economy lost 966,000 job openings last year. Big chunk, right? According to the December job openings and labor turnover survey, layoffs were little changed, but job openings continued to fall. Here's the good news. The monthly ADP National Employment Report showed that the private sector added 63,000 jobs in February of 2026, bringing the total employment to 134,662,000, the highest it's been in years. So we saw a drastic loss. We're seeing an increase over here. That's where we're sitting at. So it goes on. It says the job gains were the highest since July of 2025, with construction, education, and health services the hottest employment sectors. Now here's the quote. We've seen an increase in hiring and pay gains remain solid, especially for job stayers. Neela Richardson, chief economist for ADP. She said this in a release. She went on to say this, but with hiring concentrated in only a few sectors, our data shows no widespread pay benefit from changing jobs. In fact, the pay premium for switching employers hit a record low in February. So while the jobs market isn't necessarily thriving, it isn't struggling to the point that it would lead to a housing market crash anytime soon. So when you start talking about economy, and especially if you try to zone in on a specific industry like real estate, you have to step back and start looking at other type of industries and statistics to see what is going on there. And one of the biggest ones to check is the jobs, right? Because that's how we afford our houses. That's how we afford anything. So what do we see in the job market? Well, an adjustment, a stabilization, a switching back and forth. Anything drastic there? No, there's nothing drastic. All right. This is kind of a big indicator too. We'll talk about home inflation and price increases, right? So it says this, home prices continue to slowly rise. Are home prices slumping? Not really. But they are also not experiencing the rapid growth seen in early 2025. U.S. single-family home prices increased by only 0.7% year over year in January, which is why, note this, if you had 0.7, that's under the 2% benchmark of inflation month over month that the feds look at before they start lowering their interest rate. If that rate right there goes down to 0.7, what did we see in February? We saw a rate drop down to 6 and a little bit down to 5.99, right? It adjusted because the inflation was getting closer to that benchmark. Actually, it went below that benchmark in January, according to this report. So that means that interest rate came down. But look, it didn't go into the negative, so we weren't losing value. Now, a lot of people will do this. A lot of people go into the MLS and see, homes being reduced and homes, getting expired, that kind of stuff. That does not mean that the price of the homes themselves have went down. It's just that the idea behind the listing price and what the seller thinks their home is worth is still operating under a higher idea of what inflation is. It doesn't mean they've lost equity. They just are not going to get as much equity as they thought they would, right? Especially the majority of people that bought 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. They're still got a lot of equity and they're still gaining equity. They just don't have as much as they thought that they had. And it takes a little bit of time for agents and the data to catch up with itself so we can start pricing homes accordingly. It does not mean they're losing equity. They just don't have as much as they thought they had. Quote this, the current data reveals a two-speed housing market. While high-cost coastal and Sunbelt regions are undergoing price corrections, the Midwest and Northeast are proving remarkably resilient due to their relative affordability and stable employment bases, Totality chief economist Selma Hepp said in an analysis. Okay? All right, housing market crashes, supply and demand dynamics. So this is the next topic. What does supply and demand do in response to the economy? Well, how does that affect things? It says this, for the housing market to crash, supply and demand must be drastically out of balance, favoring supply, favoring the amount of homes on the market. While supply is tight, the discrepancy isn't as drastic as it was in 2008. As of January 2026, the National Association of Realtors showed a housing supply of 3.7 months. Now, that right there is what we call the absorption rate, that 3.7 months. The absorption rate, for those that might not understand that term, basically just means if I was to not, if all realtors and everybody else out there was to stop putting their houses on the market, how many months of supply would we have before we ran out of inventory? Okay. They're basically saying that if we were to stop listing houses right now, we would run out of homes to sell in 3.7 months. Okay, that's the absorption rate number. That's what that means. Quote, in a normal market balance between buyers and sellers, we would have a 6-month supply of homes, said Rick Sharga, founder and CEO of CJ Patrick Company, a market intelligence firm for real estate and mortgage companies. And this is where we get into the 2008 comparison, because again, 2008 was actually the crash. 2022 was what we would call a recession. Crashes like bankruptcies and foreclosures was just rampant. That was a crash. The whole market just crashed and fell out from underneath itself, right? So we're comparing that. So for comparison, the buildup to the 2008 financial crisis led to a drastic oversupply. And look at the quote. Look what it says. How much was our monthly supply? 13 months. Okay? That's so many homes, way more homes than buyers. And that's way on the other side. So that supply was so high, so many people were holding so much debt of building homes and putting their homes on the market that the equity began to drop because now you're competing with a small pool of buyers, which means you're undercutting your price, you're losing money, there's no equity to be had. So again, that was a 13-month supply back in 2008. Remember, we're sitting at 3.7 months. That was more than double the average figure of 6 months and more than a way to go from the current 3.7 month supply. So if we look at the supply and demand makeup, you have to ask yourself that question again. Are we headed towards a crash? The answer is no, right? That's not what we see. There's also demand chipping away at the current market supply, likely driven in part by consumers taking advantage of declining mortgage rates. For instance, the average rate for a 30-year fixed rate mortgage is near 6%. While these aren't the rock bottom rates seen in early 2021, sub 3% mortgage rates are unlikely to return. Hence, eager buyers are getting a foothold in the market where they can start building equity in their homes. If interest rates decline, owners can always refinance for additional savings. Now, this is another point here I talk about all the time, is you would look at this and those that are sitting at around the 3% rate would say, like, I'm locked in, I don't want to sell my house because I got a really low rate. Every month, every year that goes by, you're getting less and less people that have those lower interest rates. So the 6% rate, even if it's 6.5%, is a very enticing mortgage rate, especially if you're renting and you're not building equity anywhere. This is a great market, right? You should be buying. If you can afford to buy, you should absolutely be buying. So this is changing. This is a changing makeup. So there's that economic metric there that we're watching, is to answer the question if we're heading towards a crash. Now, housing crisis lessons for today. So this is for us to be thinking about. The housing crash that started in 2007 and contributed to the global financial crisis continues to weigh heavily on the minds of many economists and consumers, which it should, right? We should always never forget history and try to avoid repeating it, especially if it's really bad history. But the factors that led to that crash are not in place today. And this is a great contrasting thing. Guys, I appreciate all the likes. Thank you guys so much for that. Appreciate that greatly. Not only are housing supply levels and home equity levels vastly different, but mortgages are a different animal as well. Now here's the quote. Lending practices have tightened significantly since 2007, making for a widely different scenario today than we have faced back then. David Gottlieb, a wealth advisor at Savvy Advisors, said via email. And that's very true. If you were to look at the Dodd-Frank law that was passed back in 2009, back to 2008, 2009, you'll see that a lot of the lending practices they were doing back then are not even possible now. So you don't have these bad mortgage products going on the market where people are buying homes that can't actually afford them. They can't do what they were doing back then. So that's a big, big change. Gone are the days of the low to no documentation mortgage and zero down for anyone and everyone, which is what happened back then. When I first got into real estate, it was wild. I mean, it's like, man, we could negotiate TVs, couches, tractors, cars. I mean, anything was go, man. It was like you could write anything in that contract, furniture. I mean, it was just the wild, wild west. It was craziness. Today, lenders are looking for buyers willing to put skin in the game. The lowest down payments are typically with VA loans, which offer zero down, and FHA loans offering down payment as low as 3.5%. Both loans still require income, asset, and employment verification. In other words, they will go into the weeds and make sure that that person can afford that home, right? It's highly scrutinized. With those subprime lending products gone and most mortgage lenders requiring money down, today's homeowners also have significantly more home equity than those from the early 2000s. Today, the average American has just under $300,000 in home equity, and sellers can afford to cut prices to close a deal. And this is the thing too, is like the amount of equity that the majority of sellers have in their home is so vast. Like compare, if they've owned their home in 2020 and now they still own that same home, think about how much equity they have in their home, right? A ton of cash is sitting there. They have ways to liquefy this. If they got into a financial situation or job loss or whatever, they're sitting on equity, right? So that's a big factor. When comparing the financial health of the consumer and banking industry between 2008 and today, we truly are looking at apples and oranges, right? How much more do I want to really labor in on this? And this article is so deep. I appreciate the contrasting of what this is. And they've broken the statements down to what's going on in the economy line by line. And they're talking about each little metric that affects the economy. And then they get an opinion from an economist in that industry. So well done in your research on this and bringing people that actually understand their industry to give an opinion on this, right? I mean, it talks about signs of a housing crash. Whether you're monitoring your home's value or hoping to buy a new home, you may want to watch for signs of a future housing market crash. An economic shock, such as a significant stock market crash or a prolonged period of job cuts, could signal the start of a housing market crash. So that's a metric you can watch. If unemployment rapidly rose rapidly, that would be a factor. Now, the next one, it says what a housing market crash could mean for home buyers. It says a housing crash is a mixed bag for home buyers. Crashes typically come with other economic undesirables like job losses, even if housing prices drop. What a housing market crash could mean for sellers, right? So this article goes on and on and on about multiple different things going on that can drive the housing market to lead to a crash or adjustments or whatever. The links to all of the articles that I discussed is in my YouTube channel's description of this video. So you can search for me on there. It's the Real Estate Advantage on YouTube. Search me out. You can find this live stream. You'll see these articles. I encourage you to go and click on these articles, read through these, digest them. And if I was to give you some action items out of this as real estate agents, look, you need to be the one talking through these factors, because even agents themselves don't fully grasp how the economy rises and falls. Matter of fact, hold on. Yes. This book right here. Now, you guys might have thought these were all just for show. These are some of my favorite books, by the way. This book right here is How an Economy Grows and Why It Crashes by Peter Schiff. Okay, so my camera up there on TikTok kind of messed up. All right, so it is a very, very simple read, and you might disagree and agree with this guy, whatever. But look, you need to go through and look at. I mean, if you're a visual person, there you go. Look at that. I mean, it's got all kinds of little cartoon characters and all that kind of stuff. It is a super easy read. It talks about just the economy. It begins at a very simple state of what economy is, and it builds and gets more and more complex from there. And then it begins to break that down. So I would say, like, Pick this book up, How an Economy Grows and Why It Crashes, by Peter Schiff, and just read through this and get an understanding about the economy, because I think it's going to, I think it's going to add more understanding to what we're even talking about here. But we need to be the informants about what's going on in our economy. We need to be the ones educating our clients on what equity is and what the crashes look like, right? So I would be taking these articles, drafting marketing materials or short little videos out of this and sharing it with my clients, right? I would create a series of a drip campaign or something like that inside of your CRM and have it going out, talking about why this is not a crash, right? I think that's just a good thing. I really do. All right, let's jump into the next article here because it stays right on point. I'm not going to spend as much time on this one as I did that one, but I want to get a contrasting opinion here. But I don't think it's even a contrasting one. I think they're actually more in agreement. Oh, goodness. All right. So this is by foxbusiness.com, written by Eric Revel with Fox Business. It says, housing market gaining momentum as spring season begins. Mortgage rates climbed from 5.98 to 6.38 in late March, pushing typical payments up 1.5% from February. Not a drastic thing, right? All right. The U.S. housing market accelerated in March despite elevated mortgage rates, reducing some of the affordability improvement the market had recently seen, according to a new report. Zillow released its market report for March, which found that newly pending home listings increased 4.6% from a year ago in March. So let's go back to what we just talked about. We saw an inflation still happening, right? Increased in properties and an increase in listings. That increased the number of listings to the second largest monthly total since the end of the pandemic boom in August of 2022, which Zillow said was a positive sign for the market as the home shopping season begins in earnest. So again, not seeing the makeup of a crash, right? We don't see that. The housing market's uptick occurred despite mortgage rates increasing from 5.98 at the end of February to 6.38 in late March, or 6.43 if you're watching it today. All right, Zillow found that the monthly mortgage payment on a typical U.S. home was $1,789 in March, giving a 20% down payment after excluding taxes and insurance. While that figure rose on a monthly basis, it was 4.4% lower than last year. So this is where you would say a restabilizing of the market. High inflation, but homes are coming back down to where the value is. And we're adjusting to that idea, which is why you're seeing that number. Even though interest rates are going up, payments kind of going down because the purchase price is kind of adjusting to what the market is. But remember that all these owners of these homes have a large amount of equity. So just because the market is coming down and they're not selling it for as much does not mean they're underwater. They still have a lot of equity. It's an adjustment to the market. There were 1.23 million homes listed for sale in March. Inventory rose 9.5% from February, and active inventory was 4.2 higher than it was a year earlier. All right, we get that idea. Newly pending listings, a figure that measures listings which changed from for sale to pending status rather than closed sales, shows 4.6% growth from a year earlier and a 29.8% increase over February. Again, improvement. And this is the quote, buyer and sellers have been navigating uncertainty and market volatility in some form since the onset of the pandemic, and this month's concern over energy prices is no different, said Misha Fisher, chief economist at Zillow. Goes on to say this, however, we have persistent signals that the market has turned a corner. We just talked about all those signals, right? We just talked about that. Watch what she says here. Pent-up demand from 3 years of low sales volume and winter storms in January and February, along with the tailwind from lower mortgage rates earlier in the year, seem to have buoyed the market as home shopping season kicked off. In particular, the rapid acceleration of daily page views per listing we saw in March was a noteworthy improvement over the dormant market of recent years. So people are getting more interested. They're okay with this adjustment. They're moving forward to this adjustment, right? So that's that article. So that's some statistics that shows you kind of what Fox Business is saying. It confirms what we just read about different metrics. So the question we go back to again that was asked at the very, very beginning is asked by this article here: is the housing market going to crash again? What say you? What say you? I encourage you to go out, research the data, see what's going on. What do you think will happen? What is your thoughts on this, right? I mean, if these are the metrics that we watch to see what's going to happen with the economy, then what's the answer here? Where are we? Doesn't mean you don't have slow adjustments one way or the other. Doesn't mean you have a slowdown in the market and then maybe a pent-up demand that kicks off later. Does not mean we're not going to have those things. The question, though, is are we going to have a crash? Do we see that in the makeup, right? We're not seeing that in the data. All right. Now, let's take all of that. Let's take all of that information. Like I said, we're going to read about the economy. We're going to talk about that. Now I'm going to go into an article here that's talking about the generational kind of shift that we see in response to the economy that we're in. And this is where, as agents, you guys can think through your approach to different generational eras. Okay, so we're going to be talking about Gen Z. We're going to be talking about millennials, Gen X, and boomers. Okay, that's where we're going now, because each one of those demographics have different needs and wants. And those needs and wants and desires change depending on the economy that we find ourselves in, which means the way we market, the way we approach certain situations, the way we address our niche and be able to target the leads that we need to pull from need to change with that. So this is going to be a conversation now talking through that. So let's get into this article. And this again is by Yahoo Finance. It was written by Sarah Brady, and she's the contributor of this. And here is the article. It says, home ownership by generation: how housing trends differ across Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, and boomers. Are you an aspiring homeowner? If so, your age could play a significant role in your chances of buying. Statistically speaking, older generations are far more likely to own their own homes in the U.S. in 2020 in the U.S. Right? We would agree with this, right? I mean, this has kind of always been the case, right? In 2025, baby boomers owned at the highest rates. Listen to this: 79.9% of homes are owned by baby boomers. Okay? So if you're wanting to market to the broadest audience out there, the broadest generation out there, it's obviously baby boomers. That's where we're at. But that's also where most people focus. So let's zone in just a little bit more. While adult Gen Zers owned at the lowest, 27.1%. But don't you think, just before we get started anymore, the needs of a baby boomer compared to Gen Zers, think through what the differences are. Where are they in their life cycles, and what are their needs and wants when it comes to housing? Just begin to think through that. Does that mean homeownership is out of reach for younger generations? Definitely not. In fact, homeownership rates for millennials and Gen Zers ticked up slightly in 2025. What it does mean, however, is that young Americans are less likely to build wealth through real estate than older generations. Now, this is where I would say, agents, get out there and talk more. Get out there and address, target some Gen Zers and talk about the value of wealth building in real estate. This needs to be some blog posts and videos, that kind of stuff, right? Marketing. We need to be proponents of how you can build wealth through real estate. Homeownership rates by generation. Homeownership rates increased for millennials and Gen Zers in 2025, but both groups still own homes at lower rates than their parents did. Now that means they did. If you were to take the baby boomers and put them at the Gen Z age, they owned more. They bought homes more. Now, there's a lot of factors that would drive that, affordability being one, and the job market, absolutely a big factor there. According to an analysis from Redfin, 57% of people in their mid-30s now own their residences, while 64% of their parents owned homes at the same age. Look at that difference, right? It's a percentage drop. Why are homeownership rates dropping for younger generations? It's certainly not a lack of desire. Here are some of the main obstacles to buying a home for younger generations. So here they are. And as we read these, I want you to think as a real estate agent and think through how you can help address each one of these pain points to that generation, because that's a marketing material and that's also an expertise that you can bring to the table to help this generation buy more homes, right? Older generations have had more years to save for a down payment. Now, I'm going to just, this is probably a little bit of a soapbox, guys, so bear with me. And this is not going to apply to majority of and everybody. But what I will say is this generation, this specifically the Gen Zers now, not comparing the baby boomers, there is a major push in consumerism. If you look at social media and you see how influencers work and how they make their money, they're pushing products. They're pushing that if you want this kind of life and you want this to kind of happen, if you want this and this type of clothes and all this kind of stuff, they push buy more things. So yes, saving for a down payment is a factor of that, but we have generations now that have instant gratification. They eat out more, they drive all over the place, they consume more consumables, right? And not to even factor in the cost of living has went up. That's absolutely a factor. But the question comes down to money management. Is there things that that generation can do to better budget to be able to have money for a down payment? I would argue 100% yes, right? We all are guilty of blowing money on things we should not be blowing money on. I mean, people eat out every day, and that's a huge amount of money. They don't cook in as much as they used to. The baby boomers cooked. They cooked inside. So these are big factors. Housing prices are now at historical highs. That's true. Now we're getting into the affordability thing. That's absolutely true. Mortgage rates, which were below 3% in 2020, have generally held above 6% since 2022. Housing inventory and new construction have remained low. These are big factors. Would-be buyers are discouraged by inflation, tariffs, and job insecurity. So now, these are true, but they're not 100% true. Because if somebody manages their money well, does have a good job, which we just talked about job reports, they can manage the other categories. Not negating that housing prices are expensive and affordability is costly. Yes. And yeah, you got to be way more intentional with how you save for money. You got to save money, but it's doable. But the problem is we're not teaching, we're not training the next generations. Even the kids now in high school and stuff are not being trained very well on money management. I mean, when I was going to school, it was balancing a checkbook was a common practice. Now we don't even write checks anymore. But the point is there was lessons in money management, right? How to manage your finances. That's not what is so taught, prevalent in our society. It's the consumer mentality. So I think there is a way to address this. We're not trying to chastise or punish anybody by any means. We're thinking about it logically here. Is if you spend money, you don't have money. So if you quit spending money and you live on rice and beans, like Dave Ramsey would say, I agree or disagree with him. There's things I agree with, there's things I don't, whatever. But the point is he's not wrong in regards to if you want to better your life, you save money. Don't spend it, right? Live at your means. Do not go above your means. Stay there or below that, right? That's the whole point. So there's ways around this, but why can't we be the ones kind of educating? Why can't we be the ones talking about this? All right, mortgage balance by generation. In 2025, the average mortgage balance in the U.S. was $258,214, according to Experian. Of course, when you break the figures down by generation, they look quite different. In general, once buyers reach their mid-30s and early 40s, they steadily begin to pay down what they owe. All right, so we got generation baby boomers, average mortgage balance 194, Gen X 283, millennial 312, Gen Z adults 249. Okay, so this is the average, mortgage balance that each generation is kind of carrying. But this makes sense, right? This is typical. Especially homes inflate, they go up in value. But here's the thing too, so does income though. Obviously, it doesn't go as fast as inflation. That's true. But if you were to compare baby boomers when they were buying, $50,000 a year would have been considered good money. Now, if you're not making $100,000, you're mid-income, right? Back when baby boomers were buying houses back in the 70s and 80s, 50,000 was like right at, middle of the road, mid-income. 100,000 was considered, higher up. Now that's not the case. So these are all numbers that change this. How homeownership changes with age. The gap in homeownership rates between Gen Z and millennials should come as no surprise. Home buying tends to be tied to major life events, which many Americans are delaying now more than ever. These include marriage. Yes, people are delaying getting married at a longer age now, so that delays that. So they buy at an older age than they would have. Having children, people are delaying that part. And career changes and divorce. These are all factors. These are all life events that either are delayed or cause people to buy or sell. For many people, the most significant life events now happen around the age of 30. This was not common. Matter of fact, on Sunday, I was talking to somebody that was much older than myself, and the common trend when they were growing up, they were getting married at 18 and 19 years old, having kids at 20, 21. So they were much younger, having kids and moving up. So the age numbers would fluctuate just a little bit. But here's the thing that we need to think about as real estate agents. How do we market to these groups? Well, if we know that they're around the 30 age group is where they're starting to move into these type of situations, then we know what generation is probably going to be the up and coming generation of buyers, right? We also know that baby boomers are the next generation of sellers. So now if we're going out for listings, we know that the baby boomers own most of the homes, but then we also know as Gen Zers get closer and closer to the age 30 and 40, that they're hitting the point where they're starting to get married, having children, career changes, and divorce is starting to happen. Those are the things that are life events that cause them to move and become buyers. So these are two generations that you can understand that are converging. Boomers are selling, Gen Zers are buying. Different ways of marketing. As people continue to delay these major milestones, we can expect a continual rise in the average age of first-time home buyers, and that's what we're seeing. If you think an average first-time home buyer is in their 20s, you'd probably be wrong. The average probably is right there in their 30s because it's the Gen Zers. What the future of homeownership may look like. Here are some of the home buyer trends we expect to see across the generations over the next decade or more. Homeownership rates for Gen Zers will continue to rise as this group ages. But as first-time buyers, they'll be more willing to compromise on key details in order to make buying affordable. For example, these buyers may opt for homes in the suburbs instead of metro areas, especially those who work remotely. Big generation of people work remotely. That means that's the way, where they want to live, the type of homes they want, those type of things. So think about it. If you're marketing to this generation, this is your niche. What kind of homes are they looking for? Where are they looking to move to? Right? Look at what that article says. Suburbs, if they work from home, they need an extra office space, those type of things. They need good internet. These are factors. For example, millennials move into peak buying years. The median age for first-time home buyers hit a historic high of 40 in 2025. Massively old in comparison. That's not great news for Gen Zers, since they're yet to enter their 30s. But millennials, or people who fall between the ages of 30 and 45 in 2026, are more likely to make their first purchase in the coming decade. So millennials is another big buyer group. So I said earlier, Gen Zers are convergence. I guess I actually meant millennials. I forgot Gen Zers are younger. Millennials and boomers. That's your trend right there. You got the boomers and the millennials that are converging. Older homeowners stay put longer. Baby boomers and Gen Xers who've been in place for a while will be less likely to upsize. They're not. Matter of fact, most baby boomers are not upsizing at all. They're downsizing. We saw this trend begin in 2025 with homeowners waiting longer to sell, a median of 11 years than in the past. When they did enter the market, they increasingly delisted their properties after getting suboptimal offers. That's due in part to the fact that interest rates remain high, given that around 70% of mortgages have interest rates below 5. Now, I talk about this all the time, is like, I understand if you look at just the data, that makes sense, right? We got to go into the weeds just a little bit more though, and understand the baby boomer generation. And one of the things we need to understand is that even though they might even have a low interest rate, the reality is a lot of them might still have larger homes that they no longer need. And it's costing them more money to operate. The maintenance, the utilities, everything of that home is much greater than it could even be if they went and sold, took their equity, downsized, paid off another home, maybe don't even have a mortgage at all, therefore the interest rate means nothing. But if they have a mortgage, even though the interest rate might be higher than what they're locked in at or perceived to be locked in at, counteracts itself because the cost of ownership is lower, taxes, everything else. So as the years go by, that becomes less and less of a factor because baby boomers are going to probably want to downsize more. They don't need all the space. Shakeup from the Great Wealth Transfer. The Great Wealth Transfer is underway and is expected to continue through 2048. During this major transition, members of the baby boomer and silent generations are expected to leave nearly $100 billion in assets to their heirs, including real estate. And that's the thing, baby boomers, one of the largest generations out there, right? Unfortunately, they're slowly aging out, and they will be leaving, what they said here, $100 billion in assets. We're talking real estate, land, everything, right? So there's a major wealth with the baby boomers that's being transferred down to the next generation. And that's going to be happening here. What they're saying is between now and 2048. It's uncertain how the transfer of property will impact real estate markets, but it's likely that many heirs will sell their property and use the money for down payments on homes of their choosing. So you're going to have an uptick of sales of properties, and then you're going to have a bigger pool of buyers. So we're going to ride that wave out, baby. So that gives you an idea of the different generations and what's going on here. So what do we say here in summary? Well, we say baby boomers here are probably going to stay put, but at the same time, they have so much equity that the interest rate is not as big of a factor as you might think, right? Millennials, what we hear about them, they're in their prime point of home buying years. And they're going to be making up the largest percentage of active buyers in the market. So when you're thinking about buyers, you're thinking millennials. When you're thinking of sellers, you're thinking baby boomers. Now, Gen Z, if we talk about that generation, they have a difficulty where affordability is a problem. Maybe just got out of college or just getting started. They don't have as much money saved up. They like to spend money, being more tight with your money, saving the money up, helping that Gen Zer out. You got to get in the weeds a little bit more with the Gen Zers and talk about financial money management, those type of things, and help them understand the cost of living and equity. What is wealth building in real estate? If I was to target Gen Zers and you find that to be your niche, I would begin to create material talking about the value of building wealth through real estate and talking about money management and the importance of that and how to do that effectively. I would partner with a financial planner, CPA, those type of stuff, and have conversations with them, presenting that information back to the Gen Zers and targeting them specifically and working through those numbers. And then I would get very quick with understanding what's going on with local banks. What kind of down payment assistance programs are there? What kind of grants do they offer? What are the current interest rates locally? Those type of conversations. I would get in the weeds and start doing those type of things. So this gives you a good idea about what's going on in the market, right? We got the economy. We see what's going on there. We see what's happening with the generations. I hope this has been helpful. Now I'm going to wrap up this show now with one brief little article here. I tried to get to this yesterday, but it actually worked out pretty good. We just do it today. So this one right here is NAR. This is the National Association of Realtors, and they've been going around trying to restructure a lot about what they do and how they do it. And I applaud this because in some ways they've always done things the same way, and we've surpassed that process. And this article here is specifically written by them. It's from their newsroom, and it's addressing the process of how they select committee members and board members to serve on those committees with the National Association of Realtors, either nationally, state, or locally. And what does that look like? And this reform that they're doing is going to help put people in place on these committees that make more sense. So let's talk about this, and then we'll wrap up today's show. NAR introduces new expertise-driven application process for 2027 committees. The National Association of Realtors introduced a new expertise-driven application process for its 2027 governance committees. The updated process is designed to better align member expertise with committee responsibilities, creating a more targeted, transparent, and effective approach to volunteer leadership. The changes are intended to strengthen governance by helping ensure members are matched to roles based on relevant experience, qualifications, and leadership background. Just that alone, that concept is great. Let me just back up a little bit and tell you how this typically works and how it's worked in my entire career with the National Association of Realtors. I've served on so many different committees. I've been a board president. I've done all the different roles, right? And here's how it goes. You want to volunteer, they try to get people to volunteer, and you say, yeah, pick me, and you say, yeah, I'll serve. Then the president does not interview, does not talk through anything to put people on their committees at the local level or state level. You're a good fit. Let's put you in this MLS committee. You might not understand technology at all. You might not even understand how the MLS works. You might be a relatively new agent, don't understand technology. Or let's put you on the grievance committee that goes through arbitration and goes through violations, but yet you have no experience in understanding the intricate details of those rules, right? So the point is like, it's not just about pick me and then assign me. It's about finding people that fit the committee that has the experience, the qualifications, and the leadership background that understands what that committee does. That's a good change, right? Just makes sense. Isn't it weird that this has not been the standard? But I get it. It's just difficult to find volunteers anyway. It's hard to get people to volunteer. All right, quote, NAR's committees help shape the work of our association and the future of our industry, and we want members with the right experience, ideas, and leadership to see a clear path to serving, said NAR President Kevin Brown. The new process is designed to bring more transparency to committee appointments, help members put their expertise to work, and better match talented applicants to the roles where they can make the greatest impact. Yes, I applaud that. This is what we should be doing. We should not just be appointing people to committees just because we want a number and we want to fill the seat. We got to be intentional with who is serving in that seat if we want to pass rules and manage the association correctly that makes sense. You got to have people that understand and have the expertise to do so. The 2027 committee application process begins with a new expertise profile, which all applicants must complete before submitting an application. The profile serves as the foundation for how a candidate's background, association experience, and areas of expertise are evaluated. After completing the expertise profile, applicants will move into a more tailored application process designed to better evaluate fit for specific roles. Think of this as like a job interview. You fill out an application, you put your best foot forward, you describe your resume, all those type of things. Then you go in and you have an interview, and they ask you questions in regards to what you're talented at. They take your resume and they expand upon this. Together, the changes reflect NAR's broader commitment to stronger governance, more intentional leadership selection, and greater transparency around committee appointments. Members can access the application, review resources, and watch a video walk through the committee selection process at this link here. So I paused there. I wanted to share this because NAR, even though there's all this comment about MLS and then being a governing state over the MLS and using it and all that kind of stuff, agree or disagree with that, whatever. The point is they got stuck doing the same stuff over and over again, expecting different results, or just not changing to the time. And in some ways, that's led to the stagnation of the association in general and the lack of trust from its own members. Not that it's gone, but it's been waning. I mean, if you go into a brokerage and you have conversations, you're going to have some people that are just absolutely frustrated with things. You're gonna have some people kind of grumble like, yeah, well, I'm a member. They do some good things, but it's like they're not overly excited about the National Association of Realtors, right? They do it because they need access to the MLS, and they do it because RPAC and all those lobbying and that kind of stuff is all good, all needed. But they do it because they feel required to do it, not because they see the complete benefit of it and are super excited about it. Again, not trying to knock them, but it is kind of a wake-up call. But here's the part that I will applaud, is they're listening. They are listening, and they are trying to adapt and change things. And that's what they're trying to do. So we should have this civil discourse. We should be talking about this. This isn't about us versus them. This is us being members. I am a realtor and I have been for over 20 years. I will continue to be one. But it does mean that we have to push back and say, look, not everything's perfect. Don't forget the benefit that you offer to your member base. And they're listening. They are making these changes. And this is a step in that right direction, because if you get people that understand what each of those committees does, and they have expertise and leadership ability in those fields, then we have a voice as members to be able to then navigate this so we stay relevant as realtors. What a good thing. So I appreciate that the NAR is not digging their heels in the ground and saying, no, we know best. They are adapting and they are listening and they are changing. So here's where I would pause and just say, if you are a member of the National Association of Realtors and you have a skill set that it is beneficial to the membership at large, consider serving. Consider clicking the application process for 2027, going through that and seeing where they assign you, because that means you have some kind of skill set. We don't want to see the National Association of Realtors go away. There's a lot of benefit. But at the same time, reform does need to happen. And they're listening and they're looking for volunteers that fit into these committees. So let's give them what they're asking for, because it's for the good of all. It's even good for the consumer. So there you go. That is today's show. So this rest of this week, I will be here again tomorrow, 8:30 a.m. Eastern time, where you're watching me now. However you're watching me, that I will be back here tomorrow, 8:30 a.m. I will not be live streaming on Thursday. I've got to go out of town that day for work. And then next week, just so you know, next week there will not be any live streams either. I will be off work that week as well. So tomorrow will be the last live stream until the following, not next week, but the following week. So, but be sure to follow me on Instagram and TikTok and stuff like that, and even YouTube. I will be posting and scheduling little short videos, taking what we talked about here into bite-sized content that you guys can share. So do consider sharing, liking, subscribing, all that kind of stuff. I do greatly appreciate that. And I never take this for granted that you took time out of your day to come here and listen to me talk. So for that, I am extremely appreciative of that. But at the same time, I do understand that comes with a responsibility that I don't want to come on here and just waste your time. I want to make sure that I am helping you. So you subscribing, liking, and following is telling me that I'm doing that, or leaving me a comment saying I appreciate that, or correcting me if like, hey, Adam, this is redundant. This is not helpful. I like all of that criticism. I want to get better at this. I want to make sure that I am relaying helpful information. That's the goal here. I do not want to waste your time. So thank you guys, as always, for being here. I greatly appreciate that. That is your real estate brief for today. So if you did find this helpful, please consider hitting the like button to tell YouTube you would like more of this type of content, and consider subscribing and follow me on TikTok to join a community of real estate agents that are focused on building a business that is relationship focused. I could be talking a whole lot more about a lot of many different things, but that's what we have tomorrow. So I will see you then, 8:30 a.m. Eastern time, right where you're watching me now. Take care. Have a good day.